Japan offers a captivating mix of ancient traditions and modern wonders, making it a must-visit destination. Explore Kyoto's serene temples or Tokyo's vibrant nightlife, and indulge in world-renowned cuisine like sushi and ramen. With its stunning landscapes, rich culture, and welcoming hospitality, Japan promises an unforgettable experience that blends adventure, history, and beauty seamlessly.
I'm Scott.
And I'm Melissa.
And we're the Sunshine Travelers. Our passion is travel and sharing our experiences with those who enjoy it as much as we do, or those who want to learn more about travel, or even those who just want to live vicariously through our travel stories. No matter where you fall along that journey, get ready to hear about our first-hand experiences as we visit some of the most interesting and amazing places on Earth. Today we were talking with a return guest to our show. Melissa's sister Stephanie was on the show back in episode 11, where we discussed our journey to the last frontier of Alaska. Stephanie, welcome back to the Sunshine Travelers podcast.
I'm so excited to be here and talk about Japan with y'all.
Yeah, we are too, because everyone seems to be going to Japan these days.
I keep saying I think Japan is having a moment. I think it always has, but it feels like even more so now.
We were talking about that a little bit earlier today, is that, the prices or the exchange of the US dollar is really helping to drive that right now. That the dollar is really strong. And so, maybe that's part of it, but I think a lot of it is really driven by all of these influencers heading to Japan. They take all these wonderful pictures, and then that drives the people to want to go even more.
Yeah. And then I think they were closed for so long too, right? They had stayed closed. And so people, all this extra pin up, I want to go to Japan, and just not having the opportunity. So Stephanie, you have just returned. So you have the latest and greatest. Here's everything that you need to know. So we're excited to talk to you about that. So just tell us what took you on this trip and how long you were there.
So one of my best friends and travel buddies, she had a conference for work in Tokyo. And so we decided to extend her trip and then have me joining her for a joint 40th birthday trip, since we both turned 40 this year. So it was a celebratory trip. And I was there for 10 days and 9 nights, plus a night on the plane on the way home.
Well, happy birthday.
Thank you.
I didn't realize you're such an old lady now.
I know, it's a big year. 30 for Carrie, 40 for me, 50 for you.
Yeah. We're going to talk about that last one. Well, Stephanie, what was your initial impression when you arrived in Japan? Is there anything that surprised you right away?
So this was my 4th trip to Japan, but I'd only ever done Tokyo kind of on a stopover. So that being said, since I just went last month in August, it was very hot and humid, which I knew going into it would be, but just how humid it was really caught me off guard. I mean, I'm used to humidity living in Georgia, but it was next level humid. And as soon as I got off the plane, I noticed when I was walking through the airport, there were all these signs warning travelers to be very cautious about heat stroke, stay hydrated in the summer heat. So that was really interesting. And then we just talked too about, Japan is sort of having a moment with tourism. And I was surprised how crowded it was in the summer. Summer is still peak season, but not, maybe as peak as cherry blossom season, but it was very crowded. So even despite the heat, people were everywhere.
I don't think I recognize or realized that Japan was so hot and humid.
I know. I've told so many people that either before my trip or coming back, and everyone's been really surprised, because I think also you see pictures of Mount Fuji covered in snow in the winter. So you don't really think about how hot and humid it gets in the summer, but it's very comparable, I would say, to the Southeast in the US. So,
and that's very interesting to know, because that can be a real shock to people in among itself. I mean, we had some people visit us and Scott had warned them, if we're going to play golf at this time of year, and like, it really is hot. And I think they just kind of blew it off. And then they were here and they were like, oh my gosh, like my eyeballs are sweating. Like, you're not kidding. So people need to understand that. Like, if you can't deal with the heat and humidity, and let's say you wouldn't want to go to, say, Orlando in the summer, then you probably really want to pay close attention to when you plan your trip to Japan then.
Exactly. And that's, something I don't think I would recommend going in the summer, or personally, I wouldn't want to go again in the summer. If I could choose, I would want to go in spring or fall. But for us, it was just a timing issue of when the conference was, and it was the opportunity that arose. But I do think it's important for people to know that about themselves. That they may not enjoy their trip. For me, it was a bit normal coming from Georgia, but, in Georgia, we tend to stay inside in the air conditioning. You don't go out in it. So even for me, I had to be careful and wear my hat and sunscreen and all of that.
Because you want to be out and about and do all the things that you want to do and not just be inside. Right. So
excuse me just a minute, either position yourself or the microphone where you're not talking past it.
Okay. So like this?
Yeah.
Like that? Is that good?
Yeah. You'll get better.
Okay. So if people are interested in the cherry blossom, do you know what time of year they should go?
I don't know exactly when cherry blossom season is, but I think it's around April time frame is what I've heard. I have to.
Okay.
I was about to say that would be springtime.
Yeah, that would make sense. So we'll make a note of that and look that up and put that in the show notes as well.
And I've actually, the other times we're in November and December. And even then, I love ginkgo trees. The ginkgo trees were still like yellow, sort of with the fall autumn colors. So maybe even earlier in autumn would be better for the rest of the trees, but even if you go as late as, so probably like October would be really lovely in the fall, but even into November, December, it wasn't too cold.
Okay.
Get those yellow ginkgos.
And that's really good to know. So just research like temperatures and what you're comfortable with as far as heat and cold and et cetera. Because like sometimes you just don't think about maybe what you see about Japan. You just don't think about, it's going to be really hot.
And if you're, if you're a skier and you're into winter sports, it could be, winter could be a good time to go as well. I've seen beautiful pictures of Mount Fuji in the snow and it looks lovely, but I'm not a winter sport person. So personally, I wouldn't choose to go in winter.
So can I take it that you're going to be with Emily and Carrie in the lodge drinking cocktails while we're out on the mountains skiing?
Yes. Okay. I really want Leo to do ski school, but I will be by the fire reading with a drink.
We'll have to put him and Palmer in together then. Yeah. So tell us a little bit you mentioned Tokyo, but tell us a little bit about the different places that you visited and then maybe how they're different from each other.
Sure. So our itinerary, we started in Tokyo, which I do think a lot of people do. The main airports are there. And then we went to Kyoto, Hiroshima, and then back to Tokyo. And we did do a side trip to Osaka from Kyoto and Miyajima from Hiroshima. So, of course, Tokyo is the biggest city in Japan, and I would probably venture to say most people included in part of their itinerary. The thing I love about Tokyo is it's this great mix of new and old kind of mashed together. Kyoto had been a bucket list destination of mine for a while because of its cultural and historical significance, and it far exceeded my expectations. I think sometimes you worry when you have these bucket list destinations that it's not going to live up, but it definitely did. And I only had time to go to one of Osaka's districts to see the lights one night. So I don't have like a ton of recommendations for Osaka, but I enjoyed just kind of barely scratching the surface of Osaka.
When you say see the light, can you explain more what you mean there?
Yeah. So the district I went to was called Dotonbori, and I'm going to preface this by saying my Japanese is not great. So if I butcher any pronunciations, I apologize.
It would just be par for the course on our show, I think.
But I think some people call it sort of like Times Square of Osaka. So it does have like all the billboards, all the like big, lights. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And there's places in Tokyo too that have that. It's just like walls of billboards.
See, that's what I was thinking is that is actually Tokyo.
Yeah, Tokyo.
So when you're talking about it in Osaka.
Yeah, exactly. But Osaka does have that too. Yeah, and Osaka, I would say, it is a mix of old and new as well, but maybe is more modern. And then we included Hiroshima in the itinerary because of its history was kind of the main focus there. But it was also nice to get to a coastal town and do that day trip. We did a day trip to Miyajima from Hiroshima. And it was just like a really lovely scenic boat ride away. And I really liked getting out on the water and seeing the mountain, like every direction you looked, there were mountains and it was just really beautiful. So that's kind of how we mixed up our itinerary.
I mean, that sounds great because then you get a good mix of lots of different things, right? And like, especially you mentioned you had been to Tokyo several times, just briefly, right? So it gave you an opportunity to see something very different.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it was a really good mix of different things.
And so what would you say is your favorite? Like, did you have a favorite? And then what was your favorite day or experience from your trip?
I always have a hard time with favorite questions, but I did pick a day, and it was our first day in Kyoto, kind of as I thought through our trip, that I do think was one of my favorite days. And as we just talked about, I felt like it was a nice mix of like old and new things and just different things. And I think I was so excited to be in Kyoto because I had always wanted to go there. So we started the day at one of the really famous, iconic shrines. It's called the Fushimi Inari Shrine. It's the one you've probably seen pictures where you can walk through the torii gates. It's those red gates. And I think they have like thousands of these gates that you walk through. So you can hike. We didn't go all the way to the top. We just, again, in the summer heat, we just picked a portion of the trail and did that. Then we got shaved ice to cool down on our walk back to the train station. This became a common theme every day. We got like a cold dessert, where we then went to the Nishiki market for lunch. This is kind of going back to the more like modern part of Kyoto. And a lot of times when you go to market, you do just like eat your lunch standing at the food stalls. But because we were so hot, we decided to find somewhere cool where we could sit down. So we went to this sushi place called Nishiki Sushi Shin that I had picked out. And it was really nice to just sit down, rest our feet after we'd done all that walking. And we had this amazing long lunch where we got to watch the sushi chef make our sushi right in front of us. So that was just nice to have like a leisurely lunch. And then my friend really wanted to go to an animal cafe. And so we picked a pig cafe. And we got to snuggle with many pigs there. And that was just cute and fun and kind of iconic, modern Japan, I would say. And then we headed back to the room for a nap. A nap is always, good for me, especially on the weekends. I love an afternoon nap. And then we also knew we were going out that evening. So the nap kind of prepared us to be rested for that. And we ended the day in the Gion district, which is the geisha district. And we went and did this geisha experience that was really neat. The geisha that we got to meet was she was called a Maiko. So she was younger than 20 years old. So she was still in training to become a geisha. And there was a translator. So we got to ask her questions just about her life, why she decided to become a geisha. She did a dance for us. And then some of the audience got to play a traditional game with her. Not everyone, but my friend actually played and beat her. And everyone was really shocked, which was a really funny moment. I don't think you're supposed to beat the geisha at her own game. So that was just a neat cultural experience. Then, I think y'all talked about this before on your podcast. We didn't have a dinner place picked out. So we asked the translator if she had a recommendation. She recommended this nearby curry and tempura restaurant that we went to that ended up being really delicious. And then we just enjoyed walking back to our hotel that night, and all the traditional architecture in the Gion district was lit up at night, and it was really beautiful. So it just felt like a good mix of things that day.
Were there any kind of off the beaten path destinations or hidden gems that you discovered that, most travelers may not know about? Or is this one of those places where it is so much out there right now in social media that it's hard to find those off the beaten paths?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And it's hard to know like what different people also consider off the beaten paths, but I think we found a few I would maybe say hidden gems more than off the beaten path. So one that I really loved was we did this designer garden train between Kyoto and Osaka. I'm pretty sure I was influenced on Instagram, so it might not be that much of a secret. But it does only run on the weekend, and it's the cutest train ride I've ever been on. They have like several train cars with like Zen gardens. So you just like sit there and you can see the Zen garden, and it costs the same as the regular train. So it was just this neat train experience. I love a good train ride, especially something unique. So that one was really neat. I mentioned earlier going to see the lights. I don't know how off the beaten path this is, but I did a boat cruise instead of like walking around to see the lights in Osaka. I did a boat cruise, which was nice to like rest my feet and just enjoy the lights away from the crowds. So that was great too. But yeah, I think I wouldn't say any of the destinations in and of themselves were off the beaten path, but some of the experiences were a little more hidden gems. I have a couple more I can share if you want.
No, sorry. Yeah. I guess the end of the day, so all of it's coming back.
Oh, well, that's good. The next one, sorry, we'll lead into, yeah. Because I wanted to ask you in a minute about like how, like what things you booked ahead of time and then what things you booked. And so I think this next one where we talk about planning will be good, I guess, to lead into that. So tell us a little bit about how you planned for this trip. And so for people who don't know Stephanie, like she is an excellent trip planner and an excellent restaurant finder. And so tell us a little bit about your process, because I mean, you like from what you've already described, like you had very set things, like you knew, right, which things would be of interest to you. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, sure. I love trip planning, not as much as travel, but I do enjoy it a lot. So kind of in the lead up to the travel itself. So one of the first things I did with this trip is, and I like to do this a lot, if I know someone who has been there recently or in the past, I try to get a brain dump from them on what they recommend. So I have a friend who travels to Tokyo pretty often on business. So I got all her recommendations. We went out for like tea and coffee, and was just listing things off, and I took notes. And I also had a couple of other friends, work colleagues who had been to Japan recently. So I talked to them, had them share their itineraries and advice with me. And then something I like to do, especially when I travel with other people, is ask each person on the trip what their top experience or wish is for the destination. So that way, when you're planning, you make sure you have something that everyone enjoys. So for my friend, she really wanted to do the animal cafe, which I mentioned before, a cultural performance, which ended up being the geisha show, because the traditional like kabuki theater, it was all closed for August. Like they take a break in August. So kind of the geisha show was that. And then gardens on her list. So that just going to the gardens at the temples and the shrines. And then I wanted to do the geisha experience that was on my list. Go to the traditional onsen. That was something I had never done before on my previous trips to Tokyo and had always been curious about it. And then I love tea. So I wanted to go to a tea ceremony, which I had been to one before, and a tea house. So those were on my list. So we kind of planned around those and made sure we hit those. I am still old school and I love a good guidebook. So I always download Lonely Planet is kind of my go-to depending on where I'm going. Usually I try to get them free from my library Libby app. Sometimes I have to do the request through the library, but usually I just try to check out the books and not buy them because I have way too many books, as most people probably do on their bookshelves. Also, of course, online research. And like we said, I was influenced by Instagram in some cases as well. And then I also like to look up National Geographic itineraries for ideas, because in my mind, if it's good enough for Nat Geo, it's good enough for me.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion. I want to go back for just a second. I want you to explain for people who may not know, because I think we've kind of breezed over some of the things that we've talked about. So maybe talk a little bit about the geisha experience and like who they are and why that would be of interest for you guys to do that.
Yeah. So, I think we all kind of have perceptions of geishas from like movies, and geishas, they're very culturally significant sort of performers, and they are, women, and they, paint their faces, they wear certain clothes. So I was just very interested by it. I also had noticed, this was on Instagram, that, when you see them out in Japan, like you shouldn't, photograph them out of respect. You should really, like, they are very sort of like respected and honored in the culture. And so in order to have that experience, you kind of need to do the geisha experience or show. So I just thought it would be really interesting to do that. And yeah, it was, as I said before, it was neat. Like we got to ask her questions about, and one of her answers of why she wanted to do this is like, she gets to travel abroad. And so it's a really good opportunity for her to see beyond, Japan, beyond her own country. So I thought that was really interesting. And that was sort of one of her reasons for doing it. But we got to see like her outfit. I mean, it's heavy, like some of the stuff. One thing I really wanted to ask her about. So there's like a certain way they have to sleep when they're in training, because their hair is like, the way their hair is fixed. They have to like, I don't know. It sounded very uncomfortable to me. I wanted to ask her a question about it, but I like held my tongue. So.
And so that was just something that you learned during the
So the translator had
before
that like when because she did a little sort of preface about like geishas versus, like, I didn't really know anything about like geisha versus maiko. Geishas are older than 20 years old. Maikos are younger than 20 years old. So she kind of gave us some information around that and told us how you could sort of tell from what they were wearing.
Oh, interesting. So it just gives you a behind the scenes, because like you said, you're not going to like
walk up to
them and talk about them. And you can read about things, but it's different from now saying, okay, I feel like we've like had an interaction with you, So that's very interesting. And then the other ones you talked about, the tea experience.
Yeah. So the traditional tea ceremony, I had done one in Tokyo before. This one we did in Kyoto, because it's even sort of more traditional in Kyoto. I think that's where they originated. So for those, they're making you matcha tea. And the one we went to was like an hour ceremony. She demonstrated it and walked through the whole process. And then we had a chance to make it for ourselves. But I mean, she explained in the very traditional tea ceremony, it could be like a day long where it's not only tea, but it's food, it's performances. So it does feel very traditional when you're doing, and the people, like our woman who did the tea ceremony, she basically like studied to do this. So like, this is her expertise, is doing these tea ceremonies, and they do different ones depending on the seasons. And they pick sort of like a theme. So ours was about kind of being, which I really love, was about like being present and sort of slowing down, which sometimes when you're on a trip, you're sort of like frenetically trying to see everything. So it was really nice to like go into the tea ceremony for an hour and be reminded, like, just enjoy being present in this moment and experiencing the culture.
And so then tell us a little bit about how you booked those. Then, because obviously, I guess through your research, you had read about these are things I'm interested in. So then what did you do about booking them?
Yeah. So for booking those two, I think both of those I found through TripAdvisor. So just looking at reviews to see what was popular. And then I just booked those online. But those, I would say I would recommend booking experiences like that ahead of time, because they do book up. And so if you don't, if you know that's something that you want to do, it's good to book in advance.
And then what were the things that you just played by ear or found once you got there? You mentioned the one restaurant is just asking, locals, where should we go? Was there other things that you just kind of let evolve?
I mean, we definitely booked our hotels in advance. And then
it's a little overrated.
Yeah. I mean, we don't always book hotels in advance.
Yeah, we don't either, but never by on purpose. So.
And then we did book one of our train legs in advance. So I don't think we've talked about transportation yet. So maybe we'll talk about that in a little bit. But we did book the Kyoto leg in advance online. But then, and I think that's important to do if you're traveling during like the very peak season. But we didn't have an issue the rest of the trip, just showing up to the train station. Because what we realized is when we booked online, you still had to go to the kiosk and get the printed ticket. So it was sort of like, okay, why are we, booking in advance? And it was nice to be flexible. And it actually ended up being a lifesaver for us because my friend got COVID and didn't feel well. So like it was just nice to like play it by ear the next leg when we were going to Hiroshima. We could just kind of play it by ear when she felt it. So when she felt well enough to travel. So, and then I did have to book more hotel rooms due to COVID. So, but my immune system held strong and I somehow didn't get COVID even after like sleeping in the same room with her probably the 3 days she was most contagious. So kudos to my immune system. And then we did have to book the animal cafe, but we booked it just like an hour ahead of time because we wanted that flexibility, but they require that you have a reservation to even kind of go into the animal cafe. But most of the restaurants we went to, as you mentioned, we didn't need bookings. There was we did this one traditional vegan temple lunch at Tenryuji Temple in Kyoto. And that one you had to book in advance. And I actually saw people like try to go get a reservation. They turned them away. So I was glad for that one. But yeah, most of the temples and shrines are free to visit. So you don't have to book those. And if you do have to pay for them, it was super easy to just show up, get your ticket at the kiosk. So it's kind of nice. I felt like I could be more flexible than, I feel like a lot of times in Europe for attractions, you do really have to reserve things. So I kind of like that flexibility a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. Any special attire that you need to wear to go in those temples?
I wouldn't recommend for Japan, like packing more conservatively, especially like women. Like I didn't bring any tank tops. I mean, it was, again, very hot. So I did some, shorter skirts. I did some dresses. I did do shorts. And I think, people kind of expect Americans, like you can wear shorts. And for things like hiking, I think it was fine. But I would recommend more traditional. But it wasn't as like strict as maybe like Thailand or somewhere like that, where you have to like cover your arms, or like the Middle East.
And do you feel like that they tend to dress more, I don't know what the word is, just very nice
put together?
Together. Okay.
I would say very put together. So I like tried to be like cuter than I probably am at home, and look a little sharper just because you want to, kind of fit in and not stand. I mean, clearly I stood out, but as much as
sharp or smart, I guess.
That would be the word. Especially Tokyo, right? Because it's a major city and very fashion forward. So
let's go back to transportation real quick. Were there any challenges in getting around, or did you find the transportation system really easy to use?
I found it pretty easy to use. I would say I could see how it'd be very confusing, especially if it's your first time going there. Just because I would say, especially in Tokyo, because there's so many different lines. It's just like, any other major city. So many different lines you kind of have to figure out like, oh, I need to change trains. All that is in play, but Google Maps is really helpful. We got a transit pass through like our wallet on our iPhones, which was really easy to use. So you could just reload it from your iPhone. Like you didn't have to go to the, ticket booth or the kiosk to get your tickets. And then you could just swipe in for the subway and the bus. The buses do also have like change machines on them, so you can make the right change. And then, I've always, once I like need help, I'm not really very shy about asking either a fellow passenger, or if I see someone who works, for the transportation system, just asking them the question. We talked a little bit about the bullet train. I found it easier just to book those from the kiosk day of for all our legs, but you might want to book in advance during.
So you had booked, you said the first leg in advance, but not the rest of them, but it really didn't end up mattering.
It didn't end up mattering.
It wasn't like it was sold out.
This time of year.
Okay.
Yeah, we didn't have any issues in it. And we were in, so there's two different cars on the bullet train. There's unreserved and reserved seating. So it's like you really wanted to make sure, if you have a bigger party, you probably want to do reserved seating. So you make sure all together. Since there were just 2 of us, we just did unreserved seating, and it actually gave us more flexibility again, because the unreserved seating, you could just if you missed your train, you could just take the next one, because so made it pretty easy. And then you can also call taxis with your Uber app. So we did that some, especially in Tokyo. And then one thing to note, the driver will open the taxi doors for you. So kind of waiting on them to do that for you. That was sort of interesting. Yeah. And another thing about traveling in the summer that I wouldn't recommend is it's typhoon season. So my friend actually had a typhoon in Tokyo at the beginning of her conference, and then we had a typhoon headed towards us near Hiroshima. It actually ended up just staying in the southeast, but there were some transportation issues because of just rain in general. So that was really interesting, because you hear the bullet train is so, on time, but obviously weather impacts it can't be.
So interesting. Yeah. So just interesting to know that. And so did that impact any of your plans, or not really, since you hadn't booked? It was.
Yeah, it didn't. And it ended up, it mostly stayed in the 2 southwestern islands, further away from Hiroshima. And then we just kind of kept an eye on it. And yeah, I think one day, maybe the day we were leaving Kyoto, our train was delayed maybe 45 minutes, but it wasn't bad because of just other weather. I think it was other rain. Yeah.
And then the boat ride you mentioned that you took in Osaka.
Yeah.
Did you book that ahead of time, or was that just something you just...
I just showed up to do that. Yep.
Okay.
Showed up and booked that. And then same with going to Miyajima from Hiroshima. I just showed up and bought that ticket. And actually that's maybe one of my hidden gem recommendations. A lot of people just take the ferry to the island when they go to Miyajima. And I don't remember how I read about this, but there's a scenic boat ride you can take that kind of takes longer. It's more expensive. So that's probably why a lot of people just do the ferry. But I really enjoyed doing that. And I would recommend at least doing it one way. So I did that one way and then just took the ferry back. And that actually leaves from the Peace Memorial Park, where the Peace Museum and the park and monuments are. So you could kind of pair those 2 together.
Okay. And then you just booked that on the spot, you just went.
Yeah. I just showed up and bought my ticket. Okay. There was a lady there that I bought my ticket from. So it was super easy. Yeah. And there were 3 of us on that boat.
Oh, okay. Nice.
2 other Americans and me. So.
Okay. So sometimes those are just fun just to, be able to put in my ear and just enjoy sightseeing and being in the moment.
So was there a moment where you really felt connected to the local culture? Either during the tea ceremony that you went to, or visiting one of the shrines, or, anything of that nature?
Yeah, I think there were, a few moments. I mentioned the tea ceremony and how she explained the different aspects of the ceremony, and just how the theme of the day was sort of slowing down and being present in the moment. And I don't know, I think I felt like that helped me appreciate culture and history more. The first shrine I went to in Tokyo was the Meiji Shrine. And I'm sure I had done this on previous trips to Tokyo, but something about it, this trip really stood out to me more, is before you enter, you go through this purification ritual, just to show respect to the culture. So there's a wooden dipper, and you use it to wash both your hands, and then you're supposed to rinse your mouth. So I kind of read about it online more this time, and I think I was more aware of it because of that. And then something about going through that, I think, and doing it with Japanese people helped me feel connected to the rituals and customs as well. Yeah. And then I think just interacting with locals. So especially in Kyoto and Hiroshima, this local seem friendlier. I think Tokyo, it's a big city. It's not that people weren't friendly, but it's just people slow down a little bit. And just simple things like someone helping me with the bus, even if I didn't really need help. But then I got to chat with her about Snoopy, because she had a Snoopy on her bag. Or this man recommended a restaurant to me that was kind of already on my radar, but then it confirmed it for me. Oh, okay, I should definitely go eat dinner here tonight. So I think that just helps remind me of a large part of culture. Feeling connected to a culture is just your interactions with people and just everyday things where you're like, I'm riding the subway and the bus and train or the streetcar. So Hiroshima has streetcars that are really cool, and they had them like back in the day as well. So it's kind of a, homage to their history. Just things like that. Like for me, it feels more exciting because I live in a car city. So it's like, cool, they use public transportation. But then you look at people on the subway and they're like, okay, you can tell they're like bored going to work, But it makes you feel just kind of like, oh yeah, this is like vacation for me, but this is like everyday life for others.
No, I totally get it. When I see like little kids or even like the teenagers going to school on the tube in London, and I'm like, that's pretty amazing, and they're just like, whatever, we've done this our whole life. But yeah, I get it.
Yeah. And then at the end of the trip, when we were back in Tokyo, so at the beginning of the trip, we stayed in the more modern section of Tokyo. It was like on the western side of Tokyo, Shinjuku. And then on the end of the trip, we stayed on sort of the eastern side in Asakusa is the neighborhood, and it's more traditional neighborhood. There's a famous temple, Sensoji. And we visited there. Like one of the advantages of staying in that neighborhood is you can visit at night when it's less crowded. I obviously like lights because I keep mentioning it, but it's all lit up, the lanterns, the lights. And then the next day, so we did that one night. And then I think the next day or a couple days later, we went to the Tokyo National Museum, and which was great seeing all kinds of different things from all their periods. But one of the pieces that stuck out to me was print from the 19th century, from like the Edo period of the Sensoji temple. So like that temple we had seen 2 days before, it had been around obviously since the 19th century. So that was a neat moment of, I think, just history and culture combining. And then I think last but not least for me, I love eating. Like you said earlier, I love food and drink. So this trip, I literally had a list of like food I wanted to eat on my planning spreadsheet. Yes, I'm still old school and use like a spreadsheet. Yeah, so that was just to help me track, like, did I eat everything that I wanted to eat? So, like, beyond the, obviously, like, certain things like sushi and ramen and udon that you're going to eat, but I never had, like, shabu shabu. It's, like, where you cook the meat yourself. We did that this trip. Like, some of those things where you need to look out for a little bit more.
Yeah, and things that you're not gonna, that haven't made it, to be super common at home, too, right? Yeah. So that's really cool. That's neat because that's such a big part of, travel is trying the food and trying different things that you've never done before. So I think that's super cool.
For someone that's visiting Japan for the first time, what would be your top recommendations for them to do or see?
So I would definitely say start with Tokyo. It can be overwhelming. I will say that about Tokyo, especially your first time. But to me, it does sort of epitomize Japan, and it's a must-see. So, and I would recommend spending time in some of the more modern neighborhoods. So I think I mentioned Shinjuku earlier. Shibuya is famous for the crossing that people walk across, or the scramble that like all these people at this intersection. It's just like very Tokyo. Harajuku is another neighborhood. Ginza for shopping. But as I mentioned before, spending time in one of the more historic neighborhoods like Asakusa and going to the Sensoji temple. I would definitely say Kyoto now tops my list of recommended places because I loved it so much. And I also think it makes a really good base for day trips. So I only did the Osaka day trip this trip, but I had also researched a trip to Nara, which has like, of course, temples and I think a Buddha, but also deer like running around. So you get some wildlife. And then Himeji Castle was also a day trip that we didn't get to this trip, but you can do that from Kyoto. Yeah. And then in Kyoto, I hadn't mentioned this before, but they have this bamboo forest and I think it's all over Instagram. So, definitely not a hidden gem, but it's really beautiful and peaceful and kind of a nice break of all the shrines and temples that you go to. After a while, you're kind of like, okay, I saw another temple. So I would say in that same vein, pick a few temples, castles, and museums. You can't see them all. Just pick a few that you kind of want to prioritize for your trip. And then I would definitely recommend some traditional experiences like tea ceremony, geisha encounter, something like that based on your interests.
I think those are great tips. And I love what you said about, if you're going with other people, what tops everybody's list so that everybody is involved in the planning and involved in the incitement. I mean, especially if you're traveling with like younger people or kids too, right? So that they have something that they are interested in and can learn about and research too. So other tips, we've talked about several things like the weather and checking when to go a little bit. So just other in general tips that you can think about: packing, planning, navigation, just anything that you maybe wish you would have known.
Yeah. So I would say first with packing, and this is sort of my tip for everywhere in the world, but Japan in particular, pack as light as you can. Especially for navigating sort of city streets and trains, it's easiest just to have a carry-on if you can with a personal item. Every hotel we stayed at had paid laundry facilities. So I did laundry once during the trip. You could do it once or twice, and make sure your outfits mix and match. So, I try not to pack something unless I know I can wear it twice. If you do need to travel with a bigger checked bag. So my friend, for example, she was in Japan for a work conference. She had to bring all these materials for her conference. She was then going to go to Bangkok for another conference. She had a big checked bag, but she found a company that was a suitcase holding company. The one she used was called Bounce, and you could sort of check it in we found one near Tokyo Station. She left it there until we got back to Tokyo, and it wasn't expensive. So that was a really good find.
So if you wanted to take a suitcase and then just grab a few things out to take with you for a day or two, you can leave the bigger suitcase there at this holding place and then, just use that to kind of pull things in and out as needed.
Exactly. And I would highly recommend doing that, especially on the trains, because there's not a lot of space for luggage. And in some cases, you have to pay extra if you have a big suitcase.
I don't get this. I literally was showing Melissa, I was served an ad, and this lady was saying, "Oh, my husband and I are headed to Europe for 3 weeks, and we bought this checked luggage, and it's bigger and, holds all of our stuff." And I was like, where are you taking that? Yeah. Because you're going to have so many problems getting around with the transportation. Yes. Even if you rent a car, the cars are small and they don't have enough room for a bunch of big suitcases. And I was that's just the stupidest ad I think I've ever seen in my life.
Not good advice. Well, I will say, this friend I travel with, we learned the hard way in Switzerland, like way back in 2019, we traveled together. Again, in this case, she was coming from a work conference in Germany, but we were flying out of Switzerland. So she couldn't leave and she had a big, checked bag because she had to for work. And I will say it was not fun for, just getting on all the trains. So that was learned experience too from that. And just some things I had read about Japan in particular that just it made it so much easier. So that was a really good find. And then one other thing I'll say, I did more shopping on this trip than I usually do. I'm not a big shopper in general, but this trip, since it was a birthday trip, I had my list of things I wanted to bring, lots of tea home, teapot. I did pack an extra collapsible duffel bag to bring my souvenirs. Okay. Actually, I think I used one of your recommendations, the Columbia duffel bag. I wanted the foldy, but I waited too long to buy it. But it worked really well. And then another friend just used it on her trip to Asia. So
nice. Yeah. That's a great, when you and I went to Guatemala, we did some shopping for textiles and that was a great way to get some of those things home, but you don't need to lug them the whole time. I wanted to go back just real quick and tell people that I guess two things about the bigger bags is that service, like you mentioned, Bounce or things like them, they are becoming popular in lots of places all over the world. And so you can find them you need to drop your bag and that, it's, let's say you're going to a city and you're not going anywhere near the hotel. You don't have, where to leave it, before and after your flight, stuff like that. But we even had the instance in London where we went to the Chelsea match. We wanted to take the stroller because we're going to be out all day, but we can take a stroller in the game. And so Brady found one at a convenience store to where we could just store the stroller for a day, for the day during the game. So that is a handy tip just to look. And these places have apps, and I think
they do. I've actually done one in New York before. I was sort of reminiscing with my friend. I was like, oh yeah, I vaguely remember it was like I can't remember. I have to text my like other friend who I was with, but it was some random shop that like kept my suitcase like in New York City because we were going to a play and, I needed my luggage stored. So.
Oh yeah. This was literally like a little convenience store, but they had it like set up, which I think is smart, but it's helpful for travelers. So not just Japan, not just Tokyo. You're going to find these all over the world as well. And you didn't mention it, but I have seen where people have said, we had to climb upstairs and then I had all these bags, or my room was really small and I had all these bags. And so
in Japan, yes.
Yeah.
Especially I would say Tokyo and Kyoto, the rooms are very small. And so, like you don't even have room to move around your, hotel room if you pack too big of a bag. Yeah. And you can find elevators because we sought out some with our suitcases. Sometimes you have to like walk further to then find the elevator or like get a special pass or something. So it's not super easy.
Yeah, I think that's just good general advice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Yeah. And I think we talked a little bit about this is, I am a planner. I like to have things planned, but also with some like I have a rough idea of what I want to see and do and eat and drink. But just being a traveler in general, the more adaptable, and I think a human in general, the more like adaptable and flexible you can be, the better. Just inevitably the hiccups are going to happen. This trip, it was COVID and potential typhoon, but things happen. So I think the more you can kind of roll with the punches, the better. So that's more just like a mindset. And then I think I said earlier, don't be afraid to ask for help when navigating. It can make for lovely encounters. So, don't be shy. This is a very specific Japan tip. Make sure you have room in your purse or your bag for garbage because you will not find trash cans easily in public places in Japan, which is so interesting because it is very, very clean there. So it doesn't really compute in my brain but yeah, you have to carry around your trash until like you get back to your hotel room, basically.
That's interesting.
I think we saw that in the UK and Germany this past time as well. There just wasn't as many places to throw trash away. And so many times we had to, just hold on to it till we got back to either a place where they did have trash cans or back to the hotel.
Yeah. So that's a great tip. Just, having a way to
have a little extra space in your, because I typically try to have a pretty like slim purse. And which is a little bit of a problem on this trip because then it's like, oh, if I had trash, I wouldn't throw away. It's like, oh, I don't have space in my purse. So that's good to know. Or like bring a little plastic bag to put in your purse, so if you have something that's like,
to put it in. That's interesting because just like little things like that you wouldn't think about.
You wouldn't think about it.
Or slip one of those little lightweight nylon shopping bags that fold up real small.
Yeah. Good. Yeah. And then I think my last tip, before you arrive, you can use Japan has an entry app so you can kind of fill out all your paperwork and they'll tell you about it on your flight. At least they did with Delta. And that gives you faster service when you're entering the country at the airport. You still have to stand in line, but at least like it kind of expedites a little bit. And then you have your QR code that you just scan.
Okay.
So it's easy.
Okay.
Visa. Yeah. Because Visa is, you don't have to pay a Visa fee, but you just have to fill out this form.
Okay, but it's not something that has to be approved ahead of time.
No, it's not. Yeah, so I did it like on the flight.
Okay. That is good to know. Mm-hmm. As this year, we've run into a lot of, places we've talked about, Aruba, Curacao, like they want to see it before you board your flight in the US, and you need to have it printed out. And of course we have some visa required, travel coming up and just knowing those requirements. So looking that up. And of course, what you're mentioning is obviously U.S. dependent, so it's going to also depend on what type of passport you hold. So
I do have one other one. So learn a little Japanese. Again, this is probably tip holds for anywhere you go. At least maybe like top 10 words or phrases that are helpful. and you don't have to pronounce it well, but just, I think people appreciate the effort. And a little side note, a funny story. My son, while I was gone on this trip, who's 5, went to his weekly speech appointment and told his speech language therapist, my mom's in Japan. She's speaking Japanese.
Oh, that's cute.
So I was like, oh, okay. Very poorly and 10 words, but yes, I am speaking Japanese.
You know
That's
what, Melissa?
cute. That's
That
a
makes
great,
2 interviews in a row where we've heard that exact same piece of advice.
Yeah. Yes.
And
So
talk
if you-
about, connecting to the culture. That's also a way to connect to the culture as well.
Agreed.
Yeah. And our other guest, Rakima, mentioned, and we have talked about this before, like there are countries, and for us, it stands out as being like France, is they really do appreciate the fact that you greet them in French, right? Bonjour, and just make that effort. So I think, what would, just in general, hello and goodbye and,
Thank
just
you.
being able to, thank you and please and just some common things, good morning, good evening, just, whatever you think would be. But I think that is an excellent tip, just to show a little bit of appreciation that you don't just always expect other people to speaking.
And a lot, I will say that may surprise some travelers to Japan, that a lot of people don't speak English in Japan. So, you will run into people who you can't really communicate with. So that is interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting. So would you say more so like in the bigger cities, or you found probably in the hospitality industry, obviously, but
Right.
maybe if you just,
right. If you're just about, you might run into some people who, don't speak much English.
So if you were to return to Japan, sorry. So if you were to return to Japan, which knowing you, I think that's quite a possibility. Is there anything that you missed? What would you do differently? What would you add to your list?
So I do love Japan, and I feel like anytime I leave a place, I'm like already thinking about the next time I go, which there's no guarantee, but there is more to explore. And there is still areas of Tokyo. I mean, Tokyo is so big that I haven't been to. And my 5-year-old that I mentioned previously, he couldn't go on this trip. He really wanted to. I told him he had to stay home with his dad and go to school. And so he has decided that when he's 8 years old, we're going to Japan. So for that trip, I would definitely put Tokyo Disney Sea on the list. It's shockingly affordable for Disney and really different. So my friend actually had the chance to go with some of her coworkers before I arrived, and she highly recommended it. Just, it's very unique. And I think you've seen things on Instagram where it is just really different from what we can experience at Disney in the US.
And I hear the food is really good and different too. So.
Yeah, exactly. I'd also like to take my husband to a baseball game. I think that would be really fun. He's a big sports fan. I would want to do a day trip. There's a couple day trips or places near Tokyo I would want to go to. So there's a sort of seaside town called Kamakura that has like a great Buddha, other sites that would be a really good day trip from Tokyo. And then I'd also like to stay in Hakone, is a town pretty close to Tokyo that you can go stay and perhaps catch a glimpse of the elusive Mount Fuji, which I've only seen from an airplane once. And then also they have a lot of, they're called, hold on, I wrote down that, Ryokan. Ryokan is kind of a traditional hotel where you sleep on the mats. So it might not be the most comfortable. Probably would only want to do it for one night. But usually they have a traditional onsen as well, which I don't think I've talked about yet.
You mentioned it, but you didn't tell us much about it.
So onsen, that was on my list this trip. And I did go to one. Actually, it was in my hotel, so that made it super easy in Hiroshima. And it's kind of their hot springs version, but it's separated by genders and you don't wear anything. So you don't have a bathing suit or anything. And you're expected to clean yourself before you go in. So you kind of like take a shower before you go in, and then you just like hang out in the hot pools. It's kind of like go into a hot tub. A lot of time, the hotel I had, it had an indoor one and an outdoor one, but it's very, traditional sort of Japanese. But they have some, like in Hakone, the reason I would want to go there and do one, they have more ones that are like nature based that are sort of like outdoors and more natural, if that makes sense. So I think that would be really neat.
All natural and then natural.
Yeah, exactly. And then if I went back to Kyoto, I'd want to do a day trip. I mentioned Meiji Castle and Nara. And I wouldn't go back again. I think I already made this clear in the summer because of the weather, the heat, but also the typhoon. So spring or fall, I think I would want to go back. And there's probably, I actually have a coworker I found out is going to Japan again, and they're going to Kobe. So he's like, I'll check out Kobe and I'll send you some, recommendations for your next trip. Because I sent him a bunch of tips for Osaka and Kyoto. So there's always new places that you haven't really thought about that, like, someone, so I'm sure my Japan list will keep growing.
So let's draw the connection between the two dots here. Is Stephanie likes to go to places where mountains are rarely visible.
She does.
In the last episode, it was Mount Denali that you're trying to get a view of. And now in this episode, it's Mount Fuji.
And you have seen the peak of both of them. So that's pretty cool. That's very cool. Yeah. I wanted to just point out, you mentioned, because I think Tokyo, like you said, is a place where people are going to fly in and out of. And so splitting that Tokyo in the beginning and the end, maybe so it's not so overwhelming, but then staying in two different places. I think that was a really good idea and a really good tip for people.
Yeah, because Tokyo is so big. To get across, just Tokyo could take an hour plus depending on, traffic. So, and it worked out well for us. The night I flew in, my friend's conference was wrapping up. So I stayed with her at her Hilton in Shinjuku. And then, like you said, we picked a different hotel that was recommended by another friend in Asakusa. So we got to, it was neat to check out two different neighborhoods.
Yeah. And sometimes I have found is that, you visit a place and then you hear of something else, somebody mentioned something or you hear of something. And so maybe splitting up Tokyo like that, you may hear something while you're out and about the other places that you might be able to catch or something like that too.
And one thing I will mention as well is my 3 previous trips to Japan were all basically stopovers. So you could also check out Tokyo just for 1 night, 3 nights, whatever, a few hours, depending on what you can fit in going somewhere else in Asia. So that's an option as well. I do think it deserves a dedicated trip now that I've done that myself, but if you just want a taste of it or you're going somewhere for work, like if you're going to Manila or Bangkok, where you have to fly through Tokyo anyway, it's a good stopover city. And I think Narita, I actually did like a layover in Narita. It's been a while ago now, and I didn't do it through the airport, but some of the airports even have programs where they'll kind of like guarantee that you'll get back for your flight and do a little tour.
The one time I connected through Tokyo, I think I was there overnight. So like going outside the airport really wasn't much of a possibility.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we had a fairly long layover, but overnight.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So this has been so informative and so interesting to talk to you about Japan. So we are going to get some of this information from Stephanie, the places that you've talked about, et cetera, and put some links in the show notes. We probably will end up having like a dedicated post that you can read, but all those links will be there as well so that you can find these places and these experiences too that Stephanie has talked about. So Stephanie, I'm sure that your answers probably may have changed since we talked to you last time. So we're going to end the episode the way that we always do with our guests by asking you our 3 questions. So
the first question is, what's your favorite place in the world that you've ever visited?
Do you want me to pick just one? Okay.
Just one.
I went back. Okay. So I went back and listened. I picked 3, and maybe you were asking for 3 then. So if I had to pick one, I was thinking about this earlier because I had a feeling you were going to make me choose. I think I would have to say Thailand just because I studied abroad there for 6 months. I've been back, taking my husband back there. And I just think it's such a beautiful country, such a beautiful culture. The people are so friendly. And yeah, it holds a special place in my heart. And I love the food. And it's just so, it's very different too. So I'm going to pick Thailand, but that question is so hard for me.
And so what are the top places on your travel bucket list?
This is where you can give us 3 if you want.
Oh.
Okay. 3. Oh man, it changes all the time. I think Morocco. I'm going to say a U.S. one, Glacier National Park, because I just had a conversation with a couple at Leo's school, and they really recommended Glacier, and it has been on my radar for a while. And then, of course, Antarctica. I'm going to say that every time.
And Stephanie's going to go with us on the trip to Antarctica. So.
2026.
That's right. January 2026. She's got it on her calendar, right?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
And so the 3 of us will, with the 3 of us will tie for continent 7. So
we got some.
We do have some work to do before then, but that's the plan. So,
but we can all do it together. That would be awesome.
That would be
very fun.
Yes. And so then tell us, where are you going next?
So next month, we're going to do a service trip that I'm really excited about to Sapelo Island. So it's a barrier island off the coast of our home state, Georgia. And Ed and I are going to do it, just the 2 of us, for our 11th anniversary. So I think that's more local, U.S. based. And then internationally, we are planning a winter break trip. We don't quite know where yet. That'll be in mid-February. So top 3 options right now: Argentina, Chile, or French Polynesia, which are, very different. So we'll see where we land.
Polynesia, but Argentina, Chile, I definitely recommend.
Yeah. And I just wanted to say real quick, if anybody was listening and was like, why does she not book hotel rooms ahead of time? So a lot of times you guys fly standby. And so have just learned it's easier to find somewhere once you make sure that you're going to be able to arrive. So I just wanted to clarify that.
Yeah. And usually, it depends on the type of trip. So we've done some Caribbean trips where we haven't booked anything, and then we just wait until, those are shorter trips. Usually for Europe, we won't book the first night or 2 to make sure we get there. We'll book the rest of the trip. So It's more, it is a different way of traveling, but
yeah. Well, thank you again, Stephanie. It's always so great to pick your brain about travels. And I think this will be so helpful for people who are interested in, thinking about a trip for Japan or know they want to go and, have some concrete things from your list on their list.
And we'll see you guys when we get back from Africa.
Yes. Just in time for our Sapelo trip.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, thank y'all so much for having me. I hope it's helpful for people. And I love sharing about my trip.
Yes. Thank you again for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Melissa, Japan's somewhere that's been on our travel bucket list for quite a while. And we wanted to talk with Stephanie while this was still fresh on her mind as she's just gotten back. And so, what are some of your thoughts?
Yeah, so Japan is somewhere that I could go and cross off somewhere in Asia off of my bucket list.
Yeah, one of about 1,000 places that are on our bucket list that you've put on there.
Yeah, that's true. And you have only traveled through Tokyo Airport before on your way to the Philippines one time. And so our rules apply that if you don't, leave the airport, it doesn't count.
That's right. Yeah. So I've never been to Japan either under those circumstances. And so we wanted to talk to Stephanie and just find out, she's been there multiple times. I think we learned today that this was actually her 4th visit to Japan. And so, we just want to talk to her and find out a little bit about Japan. I know I'm seeing it all over Instagram, or I think it's kind of faded down just a little bit, but, talk to her, learn more about it, and maybe use some of the information that she has to help plan our next trip.
Yeah, it sounds like that we may not want to visit during the summer season, though. I was actually very surprised to hear how hot and humid it was. I think that I had in my mind that it was like a cooler climate, but we also recently met a couple who is trying to get there quickly before it gets too cold, though. So I think really looking at the weather to trying to find the ideal time to go will be important as well.
Well, and it's not just Japan, because we said we want to cross off Asia and Australia in the same trip. So we got to try to time both of those just right.
Yeah, that's true. One of the things that I really loved is that Stephanie gave the example of, like, when you travel with others, whether it's, just your spouse or a friend or a group of people, is making sure that you cater to everybody, have that list of what's important to everybody. And she said that she wanted to do, make sure she had these cultural things and balance that with what her friend Catherine had wanted to do. And some of those overlapped, the things that they both wanted to do, but then just making sure. And we had talked about that when we talked about our family trip to Europe that we took earlier this year. And our daughter Carrie had talked about just making sure that, the kids had things that they wanted to do. And then Brady had the soccer game. And so, when you have multiple people, just making sure that the trip, checks off everybody's bucket list and what's important to them to see and do.
And it's good to get that list, because sometimes you can find one activity that crosses off things on each other's list, right? And so, it's not necessarily getting a list of activities per se, although I laugh because Stephanie talked about having her spreadsheet of foods that she wanted to eat and stuff like that. Is knowing those kind of bigger wishes and goals, and then finding the activities that help check those off.
Yeah. And sometimes it's thinking about, if I go to this place, what will I be disappointed that I didn't get to do? Right. And making sure that those things would be high on the list.
Yeah. So, an example might be if you're an avid hiker, but you're traveling with someone that loves hanging out by the pool, make sure to get a bit of both in on the trip, right? So don't plan a trip that's full of just hiking. Give that pool time as well, or the relaxation. And we talk about that a lot in our own travels, where, sometimes I don't want to just go. I want to have that time where we relax and just chill out and don't do anything.
Yeah, that's definitely true.
When you are looking at booking reservations for your next trip, we recommend using Booking.com. You can choose from over 1 million properties worldwide, from cozy country homes to sleek city apartments. Find the best deals with their price match promise. Enjoy great stays at lower cost. And because flexibility matters, book with confidence, knowing you can cancel with ease if plans change or you change your mind. Make informed choices with millions of reviews from fellow travelers. Start your adventure now. Visit sunshinetravelers.com/booking to book your perfect stay. Using our affiliate links to book your experiences and travel helps support our podcast and allows us to continue to provide new content each week. Please consider using this link when booking your next travel. There's no extra cost to you, and we are compensated through the affiliate.
I did want to circle back on the question about what is a geisha, and I'm not certain that we fully answered that. So I went and did kind of a little more research on it. And a geisha is a performer. They're often found at parties or restaurants or tea houses where they serve food and drinks. They perform a little bit and engage in conversation. And so that's what a geisha is. I just felt like we didn't really totally answer that question.
Yeah. And we also mentioned her son, Leo, which is our nephew. And after the interview, we had an opportunity to talk to him for a few minutes. And he's 5. And I think that we got him to agree to let us come on the next trip to Japan when he wants to go, when he is 8, so that we can go to Tokyo Disneyland with him. But he won't budge about going sooner than that, though. We did try to say, we could go next year. And he wants to be 8 when he goes. So,
yeah,
so cute.
From exploring the serene temples and shrines of Kyoto to experiencing the bustling energy of Tokyo, Japan truly has something for every traveler. Whether you're savoring delicious street food, immersing yourself in cultural experiences, or marveling at the beauty of cherry blossoms, a trip to Japan is sure to be an unforgettable adventure. Have you ever been to Japan? If so, what is something that we shouldn't miss? Email me at scott@sunshinetravelers.com and let me know. We are always encouraged by your travel adventures.
We hope you enjoyed this episode and found some inspiration to help you with your travel journeys. If you could take a moment to leave us a review on your favorite podcast platform, it would be greatly appreciated. Your 5-star reviews help us get discovered by others and possibly featured on your favorite platform. Don't forget to follow or subscribe to our podcast to get notified of new episodes as they are released. You can also find us on Instagram and Facebook at Sunshine Travelers Podcast. Remember, that is Travelers with 1 L. Most importantly, please share it with your friends to help them catch the travel bug. You never know, they may become your greatest travel companion.